When I first started photography, I wish I had someone to teach me what the most efficient steps were in order to learn all of the basics and tell me what order to learn them in. After all, photography is such a gigantic activity with so many sub-skills to learn, and getting started in photography can be super daunting. And if you're anything like me, whenever you're learning a new skill, you want the most efficient path to get you to the point where you can start doing things for yourself. For example, when you're learning, say, snowboarding, you want the skills to be able to get down the mountain without falling over. And then from there, you can, kind of freestyle it and start having some fun. This is that, but for photography. This is a step-by-step guide of what I would learn categorically and chronologically if I started photography again, and hopefully it's helpful to you beginners out there who are a little bit lost and don't know where to focus your attention to. Now, note that there is no single such thing as a best way to do all of this, as use cases, likes, interests will be different from person to person. So keep that in mind. I'm just giving you my opinion on what I think an optimal path might be. And if your opinion differs, then you're honestly probably not at the right level to be watching this video anyway. But if you want to be kind to your other photographers, then feel free to let everyone know what you recommend in the comments below. Now, all of this is how I teach my 30-day photography fundamentals course. So if you want to skip all of this and super fast track your learning, then head over to patk.com/accelerate to learn more, and I'll leave a link to that in the description box below. All right, let's dive into the path. First, learn about photography history. Learn about where it came from, what the word photography actually means, what the process of photography actually is. Conceptually, photography is all about transferring light onto a physical medium, although in the digital age, that means pixels and in sensors. Discover all of the different types and genres of photography out there. There's so many, landscape photography, street photography, portraiture, wildlife, sport, photojournalism. There are so many, and chances are some genre of photography got you interested in it in the first place. Dive into that genre, the concept of it, the history of it, dig deep and start to find out what it's all about. Then I would research gear, but not too much. Ideally, at the very beginning, you want a very basic understanding about the gear involved to do photography. Get a good understanding about things like interchangeable lens cameras, mirrorless versus DSLR, sensor sizes, lenses, and all of the major parts that make up the photo taking experience. Don't get sucked into a rabbit hole here though. You shouldn't be spending more than a week or two on this, because the next part is actually way more important. And that is learning how to expose your image, because learning how to expose your image is the act of taking a photo. It is called an exposure because it literally is the light being exposed as an image. In the past, that was film, and in the digital age, now that's onto a sensor. Learning how to modulate the amount of light being exposed here is up to the exposure triangle, which is a combination of manipulating the shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, and all of them work together. And mastering it is the foundation to which all other images are made. It is something that you will use throughout your entire photography experience, and it is one of the most important things to learn correctly, especially at the beginning, so that you don't start to learn bad habits. I've seen so many experienced or pro-level photographers with so many years of experience still making so many errors with their technical settings, missing shots, unintentionally blurring their images or not getting them super sharp, using the wrong ISO settings, and ending up with more noise than they should have, and way, way, way more issues, all of which are avoidable if they had just used the right settings for the right situation. Learn and master the exposure triangle correctly. This is super important to the foundation of your photography. The next thing I suggest you learn is focus, because in the era of modern cameras, we have wonderful autofocus. However, that does also mean that there is a learning curve to using it. Find out the difference between continuous focus modes and single focus modes and what purposes they serve. When you do this, for most photographers, this is a point that is usually a revelation point. It usually transforms most photographers when they understand what the differences are, depending on the genre of photography they're shooting in, of course. Then learn things like manual focus, learn things like hyperfocal distancing, depth of field, how eye tracking and subject tracking works in modern cameras, and so on. And doing so will really allow you to start enjoying the fruits of your labor when you are learning photography. Learning the exposure triangle and then learning focus is the first and the second step of really being able to translate the vision of what you see in your mind's eye into reality via a photograph. Okay, if you're enjoying this video so far, I would really appreciate it if you hit that like button for me so that I know it's good enough to make even more free videos just like this one in the future. From there, I would highly encourage you to get out and shoot a lot. You have the very, very basics at this stage, and it is far more efficient at this stage to learn through experience and practice, in my opinion. Try every single setting of your camera and learn what it does. Get out there and make mistakes. Make thousands of mistakes. Don't put any pressure on yourself to make the prettiest photo you can find. Just shoot whatever tickles your fancy and whatever helps you understand the settings of your camera. There shouldn't be any stakes here. This is like a carpenter learning what their tools do, what their functions are, and what they're good for. You need to know what your tools do so that you can build something, right? And what you build or what you capture at this stage doesn't really matter so long as it helps you get an understanding of how to use the tool. At this stage, after you've taken, say, 5,000 deliberate, intentional images, you're probably going to know your camera pretty well. And I would encourage you to review your images after every single photo session, but at this stage, I would also not recommend diving into editing your images just yet. And don't take this the wrong way, but at this stage, your images aren't going to be very good. And in my opinion, it's a waste of time trying to edit bad images because you can't edit a bad image into a good one, but you can edit a good image into a great one. So let's now learn how to make good images. And the first way we'll do this is to first understand the quality of light. After all, photography literally is all about light, but light has a quality to it all on its own. Hard light, soft light, gentle light, saturated light, warm light, harsh light, diffuse light, directional light. All of these adjectives for what is essentially the same thing, but they're all different. They all look different and they all photograph differently. Now, different kinds of light will be more or less important to you depending on the genre of photography that you do. So for example, in portraiture, a nice, large, soft, diffuse light on the face is usually quite pleasing, like the one that I have here, and you might find yourself seeking out those lighting conditions often. In landscape photography, you would probably want the soft, saturated light that you find during sunrise or sunset. In street photography, you might want the extreme, harsh, directional light to add drama to a scene. Whatever it is, understanding the quality of light and how to read it and then how to attain it is a very, very important skill to discover. Now, once we have light, we have the ability to start to compose it in our images. And this is where visual patterns comes in. Just like the spoken word, with images, we communicate visually. Photographers use visual language to communicate in their images. And just like the spoken language, visual language has the equivalent of letters and words and sentences and paragraphs that when combined together create meaning. This is what visual patterns are. And I have an entire playlist on visual patterns for free, which I will leave a link to in the description box below. So I won't waste any more time on it here, but all this to say that once you learn visual patterns, you'll learn how to effectively speak through your compositions. From there, now that you understand how to use your camera at a basic level, and you're now armed with the conceptual tools for your vision, get out there and practice those techniques and make thousands more practice images. Shoot, shoot, shoot. And I remember in my first year of photography, I shot well over 50,000 deliberate images. And I'm not talking about burst images and holding down the shutter. I'm talking about individual, specific, deliberate, intentional, and thoughtful images. Shoot a lot and be deliberate, intentional, and thoughtful about every single image that you make, and you will improve greatly, I can guarantee it. Now, it's at this stage that you're probably well on your way to making good images. So it is at this point that I would also encourage beginners to learn how to start editing their photos finally. Pick up a photo editing software that speaks to you. Most people choose Adobe Lightroom, and if you want a fast track on that, I have my Lightroom editing masterclass where I teach you everything from start to finish, which you can find over at patk.com/Lightroom. But any photo editing software will do. Luminar Neo is a good one, Capture One, Photoshop, even Snapseed on your phone is totally fine. What you want to do is to start to create a workflow for your photographs. Don't edit every single photograph you have, just edit the good ones. Understand what all of the controls do and the limits of how far you can push these controls. What you're on the macro starting to look for is to start to develop a visual aesthetic. This is not the same as a style, but it is a small part of it. A visual aesthetic is the visual treatment you give to your photos based on a certain context. I explain this in my course, but you will come to a point where you edit your photos with a certain look for, say, Instagram or your website or for a client, or if you feel in a particular mood or whatever the case may be. Now, this takes thousands of edits, so don't be too hard on yourself. Enjoy the process and watch it slowly evolve over time. Most photographers will go through phases of, initially heavily editing their photos, and then over the next few years, we'll start to slowly dial it back and then ramp it up again and then dial it back and, ebbing and flowing until they find something that they like in that particular phase of their development. And this is a very undulating process, so strap in for the ride. From there, it would be beneficial, in my opinion, to really just stop doing photography altogether and take a break instead. And while you're taking this break, find some inspiration and some direction for your work. Answer some more existential type questions of, what you want to do with your photographs, what you want to get out of photography, what photography means to you and where you want it to go. Find a purpose and a direction for your photography. And from there, you can start to find some inspiration from other artists whose work or whose process you enjoy. Identify what you like about their work and try to emulate it for yourself so that you can understand the process behind it. There is a skill to looking at an image and knowing exactly how to replicate that for yourself. Settings, composition, timing, environment, all the things that make a special photo. Being able to dissect those things and understand why you're so drawn to them is the next real transformation in most photographers' journeys. Being able to find inspiration really kickstarts the beginning of the formation of your true photographic style. And once you've had a lot of time shooting and learning and getting your feedback cycles in, they will become shorter and shorter and shorter. And eventually you'll find a time where you have most likely outgrown your gear. Now, it's not uncommon to hear the zeitgeist talk about only gear all of the time. And sure, gear is very important, but it only ever matters in so much as it inhibits you from the potential of what you're trying to create. For example, if you're trying to create a dreamy, nostalgic looking portrait, All else being equal, it's very hard to do that if you've got an f4 or an f5.6 lens. It's far easier to achieve a soft, dreamy look with an f1.4 lens. And it's far easier to get a shallower depth of field with a longer focal length as well. And so if you've got a 35mm f4, your portraits will look tremendously different to an 85mm f1.4, for example. Gear matters depending on the types of images you want to create, and this goes hand in hand with my previous point. By exposing yourself to lots and lots of different kinds of imagery and inspiration, you can start to find what pieces of gear produce the results that you're looking for. But getting into the weeds like this is, a rabbit hole that is, in my opinion, best reserved for this stage of development. When you've got tens or hundreds of thousands of images under your belt and you know what you need to get and what look you're trying to achieve. Prior to that, you could fall into the trap of buying things you don't need, spending more money than you need to, or even hindering your own progress because the gear that you purchased is too complex to understand. Now, when it comes to lenses, consider the genre of photography you're most likely to do. On average, a landscape photographer doesn't need a super fast f1.4 prime. And even if they were using one, most of the time the hyperfocal distance is going to be so deep anyway that most any aperture would be decent enough if it's a sharp enough lens, and they could have saved themselves half the price and half the weight. On average, a portrait photographer doesn't need a camera body that can shoot 20 plus frames a second because their subjects just aren't moving as fast as, say, sport photography or street photography. So purchasing an expensive body that can do that is most likely a waste of money. And there are plenty of examples of this where the right gear can be matched to the perfect circumstance, and only you know what your circumstances will be now that you've shot a lot. So now is the perfect time to revisit gear, in my opinion. At the same time, or even before this, if you are game and confident enough, getting feedback on your images is super important. It's important because as beginners, we all go through this Dunning-Kruger effect where in the initial phase of our development, our perception of the quality of our work is quite high. But in reality, the work is probably not all that good. It is the honeymoon effect. Just because you feel good about an image doesn't make it objectively good. Just because you have implied meaning and emotion baked into an image doesn't mean that that image communicates that successfully. For most people, this initial phase of being attached to your images will last anywhere between 1 to 3 years. And at the really bad end of the spectrum, people get feedback from echo chambers like Instagram, where people just keep liking and positively commenting on their work. And then the photographer falls into a sense of non-progression and keeps creating work that is similar to whatever they created when they first started, thinking that their work has matured and evolved over time, but it never does. And I really don't want that for you. I want you to know what good feedback looks and feels like, because it is this abrasiveness and friction that puts us into a evaluatory state and pushes our craft forward. Jump into a photography community and ask for feedback. I have one in my Discord, which I will leave a link to in the description below, but you could also find one on Facebook or Reddit or forums or many other places in the corners of the internet. What you're trying to do at this point is discern what objectively good is. Good doesn't necessarily mean that the most people like it or that it's super popular. Good can be that it's effective, that it conveys the message that you're trying to say, or if people understand why you took that image and also think that it's interesting like you do. Define what good for you means and see if other people think that you've hit the nail on the head. Feedback and comments from Instagram just doesn't count. And then iterate. Shoot, review, learn. Shoot, review, learn. Make it your objective to shoot 500,000 photos in your first 5 years. And you'll know for yourself when you are ready for more intermediate and advanced techniques and tactics. And when you do, I'll be right here waiting for you. Okay, I hope you found this video useful or interesting. And again, if you want to fast track your learning, check out my 30-day photography fundamentals course. Also, let me know whether your journey was similar to this or not. And if you have anything to contribute to your fellow photographers, please do so in the comments below. Okay, I'll see you in the next video, but until then, get out there and make something that matters. Peace.